He's back from a sitting week in South Australia's Parliament House. Sam Telfer, the member for Flinders. How are you, Sam?
Very well, Ricky.
Bet you're glad to be back in the electorate as well?
Absolutely. It's always good to hop in the plane or the car and get back to the Eyre Peninsula and make sure I'm listening to what's happening on the ground here.
Well, you've raised some issues in state parliament this week. Let's talk about local government first of all. People are voting in their local government elections as we speak with their postal packs received. I guess you've got quite a bit of experience in this area as a former mayor yourself. Just explain why we have postal voting for local government elections in the first place.
Yeah, it is the unique aspect of local government elections as opposed to having an election day where people go to polling booths. It really is the fact that it is an optional vote. It's not a compulsory vote, so it's something which people can do in the comfort of their own houses. That we need to make sure that the packs actually get out to people. So they should have received them or be receiving them shortly in their mail. And that's for those of us who are lucky enough to have a vote in the elections. There are some council areas around the state where it's an uncontested position or even where there's not enough candidates to fill the position. So there'll be a subsequent election or process to go through afterwards. So,
yeah, we've got a quirky situation in Kingston South East where no one put their hand up to be mayor, so they have to have another crack at that next year sometime, and they'll appoint a deputy mayor in the meantime.
Yeah, there's a few cases like that around the state. So, but voting packs have hit people's mailboxes, and it really is an important aspect, especially I think for regional communities, to make sure that we're putting people in place that have got one eye on the present, absolutely, but also another eye on the future, because we in regional communities can't afford to be waiting around for something to happen. We need to be proactive in our communities, making sure investment goes into the right areas, making sure that the transport routes which councils are responsible for are strategic in the ones they invest in. There's so much that local government is responsible for and involved in, and to have the right elected members in place is really important.
Well, when people go through their voting packs and they vote, they've got boxes to number, but I was a bit confused about what was raised in state parliament this week about some sort of preference deal arrangement. How could anyone do a preference deal in local government elections?
Well, the interesting part with South Australian local government elections is they aren't party political. You look in the eastern states and it really is a partisan process, just like a state or federal election. The changes to the Local Government Act that were put in place during the last term of state parliament put the onus on candidates to actually just declare if they are a member of a political party. So it's something new which people will be seeing on their information packs. There always has been machinations by the major parties and probably from looking at it from a political lens, the Labor Party do it much better than the Liberal Party. But there's also different deals that individual candidates make with their fellow candidates, and it's often in areas where there's a ward where there's only 3 or 4 nominations for 3 positions, and there's a real important aspect to that preferential vote. So people make deals and put themselves into second or third position in other people's preferences to try and make sure they secure that spot.
But is it something where in the pack people will get a recommended order of how to vote, or if people vote one or something, it just gets spread around the way those candidates have decided based on who you voted for?
No, it's not like that at all. It's the recommendations that individual candidates put forward in their information, which is going out to voters. The unique part, I think, over the last probably decade is how prominent social media and even traditional campaigning has been in local government elections. It's always been a putting your hand up for community leadership process in local government, but as campaigns have become more technical in their nature, there's been more of that traditional party politics that comes into some of the mail outs. So there's letterbox drops and mail outs and all the rest of that electioneering material, which we usually see in the state or federal elections. So we just need to make sure that people are fully aware of who they're voting for. And I encourage people in local government elections to do your research on who the best candidates would be for your vote.
Now, when you talk about that transparency of at least you'll be showing the voting order of how your candidates are recommending, in some cases people should vote for other candidates, there's been a lack of transparency involvement of someone from Minister Brock, the local government minister's office, from what you've raised in question time, I guess, about whether or not they're involved in electioneering.
This is a question that I asked in Parliament because I've had it brought up to me by a number of different individual candidates in certain seats within the metropolitan area that you actually have the accusation that staff members from within the local government minister's office have been involved in some of these negotiations. And I really was inquiring to the minister as to what understanding he has of what his staff are doing and whether his staff are doing that, during work hours. I just have real concerns around the transparency of the local government minister, the man who's in charge of local government oversight in South Australia, to have members of his staff involved in this process. And I was surprised that Minister Brock didn't really have much of an insight into what his staff within his office were up to, and it did take a bit of time for him to come back and provide a personal explanation to Parliament and give undertaking that he's going to be having greater oversight on what his staff are up to, especially with this local government election process. What is really important is that the people voting all across our communities in local government elections are confident in the transparency and have an understanding of what results going to be driven by whatever actions, and to have the risk of outside interference or perceptions of outside interference hanging over elections is something which is never a good thing for democracy.
No, it's not, but getting on to some serious policy topics for people, at least in the Kingston area and others that have got coastal jetties. You have raised questions in Parliament about the sustainability of that infrastructure. We spoke even with your predecessor, Peter Treloar, about this one. I know it's a big headache for a council, a small one like Kingston, to maintain that infrastructure. What have you been able to get out of the government about what's happening on that front?
Yeah, this is a subject matter I'm really passionate about, Ricky, and there's over 70 jetties and wharves around the state of South Australia, and around half of them are actually, or all of them are owned by the state government. Around half are actually leased to local councils, and obviously communities through their local councils. And there really is a need for investment within South Australia back into our jetty systems. These are often pieces of infrastructure that are very old, often over 100 years old in different areas. And I've got some 18, 19 within my electorate of Flinders and all the way around the state's coastline. There's been a process which has been started under the previous Liberal government to work out some strategy and some deliverables on the future of jetties. And the department started a pilot project to develop a business case for an upgrade or a replacement of jetties within 5 strategic areas, which they highlighted. And you're right to point out about Kingston South East. It was one of the 5. Kingston, Rapid Bay, Edithburgh on the York Peninsula, Tumby Bay over my way, one I'm especially passionate about, and Port Germain. So these 5 were highlighted by the department as ones which they were looking at going through this process and working out if this is something which can be put in place and then put forward to state or even federal government for extra funding, and then it can be replicated across the state. I really wanted assurance from the Minister for Transport and Infrastructure that he, after being the new minister, was still committed to that process and recognised the real inherent social and community value, and obviously which flows from that is the tourism and economic value of jetties around our state. And it's front of mind for me in particular, Ricky, because my local jetty at Tumby Bay is actually temporarily closed at the moment due to storm damage. And it's a council which is willing to put some of its own money into this process, but it's going to need significant state and federal money as well. So I think this is replicated all the way around the state. We need to make sure there's actually going to be a long-term strategy, because we can't afford to lose jetties, which are the central community, social and tourism point for a lot of our coastal communities.
Well, it's a critical point as well with local government elections underway, and some people campaigning about rates and whether they're the right level, whether they should be lower perhaps, and if the state government or federal government or both help maintain a major part of council infrastructure, then theoretically rates don't need to go so high.
Yeah, and this is the great challenge for councils, is making sure they get the balance right when it comes to their budgets, their rates, and making sure that the allocation to the future of what their infrastructure needs are is appropriate, but also the impost on ratepayers. It's an annual challenge, and it's also a long-term challenge which councils have to take up. Make no mistake, there's been hundreds of thousands of dollars spent by councils on their jetties all around the state, and we're getting to a point where it actually needs major work done. So we're not talking insignificant funds, we're talking in the millions of dollars. And I don't believe that local government, councils and their communities should be the only ones responsible for the upkeep of these important pieces of infrastructure that people from all across our state use. It shouldn't just rest on small regional councils to do the heavy lifting when it comes to the funding of these.
Good point, Sam, and great to have you join us today on Flow on that topic for local communities, and you have yourself a great weekend.
Always a pleasure, Ricky.